Okay, let's do a different topic now. Many people find it remarkable that Judaism is quite unique in the fact that it doesn't seek to convert people. It doesn't outwardly go out and say to, hand flyers out to people and say, learn about the Torah and in the manner that you see other religions doing. My first question would be, number one, why? What if we do believe that this is something that is true and something that the entire world should be aware of? Why aren't we putting an effort to do that? There are some Jewish people who think we should be teaching the world about the Noahide laws, the laws that apply to all mankind, not just Jewish people. And then the second question would be, well, at the same time, you can't help but realize how much Jewish values have impacted the world anyway. Be it, we've got some videos on JTV that deal with this, like, the value of human life, peace as an ideal, family values, belief in the God of Abraham. So much of this comes from all of this comes from the Torah. So at the same time, we haven't focused on converting people, and yet we have influenced the world. So the question kind of becomes, how does this whole concept of light unto nations really work, and why or should it maybe involve more active
Outreach.
pursuit, active outreach of non-Jews? Yeah.
I think there's two answers or 2 points to be made about the question. The first point is pragmatic, and the second is philosophical. So let's first address the pragmatic one.
They'd all hate us, basically.
No, pragmatically speaking, it doesn't believe in outreach as the best way of spreading a message. In a sense, this ties into our previous discussion. We are, by nature, by instinct, the Torah wants us to be internal focused. And it believes that the real way to change the world is by changing yourself. There was a great Jewish ethical thinker, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who said, when I was young, I wanted to change the world. As I got older, I wanted to change my country, my town, my family. Till at the end of my life, I realized if only I would be able to change myself. And that reflects a very core Torah message. As we mentioned before, Torah starts off with Genesis. It starts off with family. It starts off with home. It starts off with oneself, one's relationship to one's siblings, to one's parents, to one's children, and one needs to get that right first. So the first and more pragmatic answer is that Judaism is skeptical about the sincerity, the authenticity of trying to persuade others of one's values, and in a sense sees that as a distraction and almost can drift into a control of others, a loss of focus of actually, if only I would be able to improve myself. And therefore it believes that true change can be affected by example. If I can go through life and I can be a moral human being, an honest human being, a kind person, who people can look at as a shining example and say, this is a person who truly walks with God. This is a person who truly and passionately cares about being the best person they can, about treating every other human being with respect and kindness and care. That is the best way of being an example. A light unto the nations doesn't mean going out there and burning others. It means by being a light, by trying to be the best person we can. So this is a practical, semi-philosophical point, that the best way to influence the world is by influencing oneself, is by being a person that shines as a role model. The second point to make is that Judaism doesn't think that everyone has to be Jewish in order to become a genuinely spiritual and moral human being, to become someone who is capable of a deep and meaningful relationship with God and a place in the world to come. We have Jewish role models, we have non-Jewish role models in our Torah, in the Bible. We are taught, both in the verses of Genesis itself and it made explicit by the Mishnah, that no human can turn to another human and say, my ancestors were greater than yours because we were all born of one couple, of Adam and Eve. We're taught that all humans are created in the image of God. All humans have the ability to choose freely, to choose wisely and well, hopefully, but also to mess up. And that's the essence of what it means to be a human being, to choose and to take responsibility for one's decisions. And every human being, Jew and Gentile, is able to do so. So the second and more profound point is that ultimately, we don't need everyone to become Jewish. That's not our aim. Our aim is that all people should be moral people, ethical people, spiritual people, people that have God's values in their lives.
But that could still require outreach, couldn't it?
So here you get to the pragmatic point of what the best way of achieving that is.
Right.
But the core message is one that we don't think is certainly not outreach to become Jews and to be part of the Jewish people. Perhaps if we also delve back into history, part of the message in the story of Genesis, and Genesis speaks about family and home when it moves on to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to the forefathers and foremothers. But it initially does start dealing with society. It talks about the generation of the floods. It talks about the generation of dispersal. And the sages teach us that God's original plan, which remains his plan, is for all humans to be able to have a direct relationship with him. The creation of a chosen nation, of a people, the people of Israel, was a second best, was a reluctant accommodation. In other words, since I see that societies don't always live up to their optimum, and it's too easy for society to forget its values, I'm going to create one nation which by hook or by crook is going to be locked into a very tight system of values. A nation which, when it does well, will prosper, and when it fails, will be dispersed amongst the world, and sometimes, God forbid, will suffer. And this nation will therefore always serve as a reminder and a wake-up call. As the former chief rabbi, Rabbi Sachs, says, whenever a society begins crumbling, whenever society begins losing its values, the canary in the coal mine, the first wake-up call is the rise of anti-Semitism. God said to Abraham, those who bless you will be blessed, and those who curse you will be cursed. And this isn't just a spiritual promise, or one directly influenced by godly intervention. It's also a comment about the reality of the world. If you have a society in which the other, who is different, those who perhaps are living a certain set of values in a way that isn't identical with that society, is able to flourish and is able to be blessed, then you as a society will be blessed. And if you're not able to respect that message, if you're going to be full of hate towards the subhuman who you see as weakening virile human values as Hitler did, and as the conscience of the world is lessening that which is human, then your society will ultimately be cursed, it will ultimately fail. And therefore, in our existence, as the other sometimes, as the alien sometimes, this is a way of sharing with the world a message in a more profound sense. The literal meaning of our original name, Ivri, Hebrew, the etymology of this is unclear. The sages, in one of the explanations, ascribed its meaning to that of the Ivri, those who are on the other side of the river, on the other side of the world, always have an element within themselves that's a little bit counter-cultural. We now know from archaeological finds that indeed Ivru was what the Egyptians called the alien, the other. And the Torah asks of us perhaps always to be a little bit different, to always challenge society and its assumptions. We spoke before about egalitarianism. I think halacha always has to be a little bit out of sync with broader societal values, because otherwise it's not forcing us to question. And if we think the values we have today in 2018 are perfect, we ought to, that's hubris, we ought to pause for thought and be a little bit more modest. 100 years ago, the values weren't identical to the ones that they are today. We are able to look back in hindsight and say, how was it possible that even intelligent and great people had assumptions which we would nowadays absolutely label as sexist or racist and other moral failures? And what do we think in 100 years' time the values will be? So I would argue that if we find a dissonance between Jewish values and broader societal values, that's a positive. That is the blessing that we are given. If we find the values exactly match, then we ought to question whether indeed we are living up to Torah, to Judaism, whether it anymore has a role to offer. And therefore there ought to be that which is challenging in Judaism. There ought to be that makes us question and question again. And we need to remain to some degree the other in order ultimately to influence the world. That is the only way we can influence the world, by being the other.
That's
so that's a pragmatic and a philosophical answer to your question.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I once heard someone talking that they were sort of very much on the sort of the far liberal side of the Jewish religious spectrum, and kind of like had like a humanistic Jewish philosophy. And they said, look, if we just become a bit, if our values and ideology becomes much more similar to a Western progressive mindset, then we'll encourage a lot more Jews to be interested in their Judaism. But the great rebuttal point that was made to that is that, well, if you show young Jews that Judaism's values is completely identical to the values of the world today, they don't need to do anything. They don't need to further engage in their Judaism.
Absolutely. The only tweak I would say is, and I don't want this to be or come across as a critique of Western progressive or liberal values.
Sure.
I'm great. I view myself in many respects as liberal and progressive and value the West. It's a critique of any society within which we exist. Any society within which we exist, our job is, and the halachic system and the nature of conversation that takes place within the Beit Medrash, within the Academy of Jewish Learning, challenges us always to engage in conversation with the past and with the future. In every conversation that we have in the Beit Medrash, we're always looking backwards. What would the greats have said? What would Maimonides have said about this? What would Rashi have said about this? What would the Gemara, the Talmud have said about this? And we are always looking forward. Does this move us towards a world, the messianic era? Does this move us towards a better world, a more positive world? And it's that conversation between the generations that can only take place because of the sense of family and continuity we have as Jewish people. The fact that we are able to refer to our ancestors 3,500 years back as our foremothers, our forefathers. It's that conversation that allows us to hopefully always be the other in any society within which we live, and therefore challenge that society to become a little better, and ourselves take part in that growth. And I don't want to overplay the otherness and the distance here. We are beneficiaries of the progression that society has also made, but our job is never to be exactly identical. Our job is always to question assumptions. That's what it means to be a Jew.
Okay, so once we have the Messianic era and you have the entire world recognizing the one God of Abraham, is there still that need for the other, for the Jewish people being distinct and separate at that point?
I mentioned before the original plan, which was for all humans to engage on this journey. And the great prophets of the Messianic era are very clear that that is the ultimate goal. The change that takes place is that this forward movement won't only be in the context of a friction and a certain tension. Let's be honest, there hasn't been a perfect partnership over the last 3,000 years.
Yeah.
There's been tensions built into it. The Messianic era is an era in which those tensions are removed. In other words, there'll be a sense of partnership and shared human partnership in that journey. And what the prophets tell us is that when we get to that era, we will all be fellow travelers in that movement. The Messianic era, which we label as if it's just one period in time, itself has a progression within it. It's not a static point in time. Were it to be static, we would question the point of it. It would appear to be pointless. So it's a continuation of the journey. Exactly how that journey unfolds is sometimes a little unclear. And the Rambam, the great Maimonides himself, points out that such speculation is often fruitless. But what we do know is that the end goal is for all humans to speak one language, to be fellow travelers, metaphorically one language, i.e. to all be on the same page in terms of seeing a relationship to God, spirituality, ethics as central to what it means to be a human being, and we will be fellow travelers at that point.
To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.